Good morning, everybody. My name is Ndapiwa Shali. I work for the Henry Nxumalo Foundation as the operations manager. And today we have our third in a series of training sessions under the Southern Africa Accountability Journalism Project. Today, if you haven't, first of all, welcome everybody and welcome to our host for today. And our trainer for today is Camilla Bath. If you haven't already seen the previous training sessions, we'd encourage you to have a look. We have a current, an open call now for pitches for funding that closes on the 31st of May. And to help, if you're interested in that, to help you with your refining your pitch, we have a training on how to pitch an investigative story idea successfully. That's available on our website and on our YouTube channel. And we also have an interesting training on safety and security that was done in February this year. And that's also available on our website. And as with those two, we will also be recording this training session, and we will also have it on our website. With that said, I'd also just like to encourage all of the participants to feel free to engage in as much as possible. We would like your feedback. Camilla has given me permission to say that you can stop her along the way, but preferably during breaks between her presentation, because we do have a lot to get through, so we don't want to interrupt it too much. So she will take breaks. So if you have any thoughts, please jot them down. And if you have any questions, please jot them down. And then when she takes a break, and also at the end of the training, she'll open up the floor for questions and interventions. With that said, I'm handing over to Camilla.
Great. Thank you so much, Ndapiwa Shali. And hi, everyone. It's really lovely to either see you or meet you. I think some of us may have worked together before, and it's always lovely to see familiar faces. But it's also lovely to meet everyone else. So before I jump in, I just want to tell you a tiny bit about myself so that you know where I'm coming from. You've given me some amazing and rich information in those intake forms, the sign-up forms, so that I know where you are in your journey, shall we say, with AI, but just so that you know where I'm coming from. I am a journalist by nature and a journalist by trade and a journalist by training. I am not a coder. I am not a technologist. I'm not an AI scientist. I am through and through a journalist. My main background is actually in broadcast journalism, but increasingly since 2018, I've been experimenting with AI, and it's something that has really got me thinking about the future of our profession, the opportunities that this technology presents, but also the risks that it presents for us. So I'm coming from this very solidly from a journalism background. I also want to echo what Ndapiwa Shali said a little earlier around engaging. I love very engaging and sort of back and forth type trainings. I don't like speaking at people. I like speaking to people. So at any point, if you have any questions, if I'm going too fast, if I've skipped over something you want me to go back to, please feel free to unmute yourselves and let's have a conversation. That really is where this kind of training is most effective. So if you can bear with me for just 1 second, I'm going to open up my presentation. It's going to look a bit strange just for a second, only because the program that I use doesn't always play nicely, but hopefully you should be able to see there my screen. And what we're talking about today is this idea of using AI responsibly. Now, this word is incredibly important to me. And the other word you're going to hear a lot from me today is ethically, because I think, according to the intake form, almost all of us have experimented with AI already. But we're all almost doing it in the shadows, right? I don't know if anyone has an AI policy in their newsroom, for instance, in this group. It's a question I pose. Does anyone have an AI policy that they're aware of in the newsroom or the organization that they work for? Please raise your hand if you do. It would be fascinating to hear a bit about it. Anyone? Anyone at all? No. this is typical, right? We are all using AI, but none of us have policies helping to guide us do it. Or let's say the vast majority of us have no policies in place. And the other thing to remember is that many people, many journalists working in newsrooms around the world have never received any formal training on how to use AI. And so what we're seeing is a lot of use of shadow AI, people using it in the shadows, not really talking about it. I strongly believe that we need to bring it out of the shadows, that we need to talk about it, that we need to sort of explain and investigate, if you will, how we can use it as responsibly and ethically as possible, because pretty much we're all using it anyway. So that's my spiel. That's why we're talking about the responsible use of AI today. And as I said, if at any point you want me to go over something, you want to go deeper into something, I'm happy to pause and talk a bit more, but we do have a lot to get through. So I'm going to jump straight in. And I want to start here. This is a graphic by an excellent AI trainer and expert at the London School of Economics. His name is David Caswell. And last year, he, at the INMA World Congress, put up this little graphic. And you can see that before November 2022, no one really seemed to care very much about AI. I'm a bit of a geek, and I've been playing around with it since 2018. So I was one of the few who was trying to play around with it. But then in November 2022, everything changed. Anyone can guess what changed this? Anyone at all? Feel free to unmute yourself and have a guess if you think you might know what it might have been. What happened in November of 2022? Anyone? No? So this is when ChatGPT was launched. In November 2022, suddenly artificial intelligence became accessible to the ordinary person on the street because we could talk to it, right? So ChatGPT launched and suddenly everything changed. And we went through this huge period trying to work out, what is AI? What does it mean for us? How do we implement it? Do we work it into our workflows? Is it okay? There's this crazy period of trying to get our heads around it. And I agree with David that we are now through that phase of saying, what the hell is this? And we're trying to work out, how do we actually use it? What does it mean for us in our day-to-day roles? What does it mean for our newsrooms? What does it mean for our profession? So we really are having a bit of an AI moment. And the thing is, as I mentioned right in the beginning, there are huge rewards that can be gained from AI. There are also huge risks at play. And I want you to drop just a little message in the meeting chat if you can. I want to find out from you, are you more excited about AI than you are scared, or are you more scared than you are excited? When you think about AI getting into our newsrooms, moving into our processes, our workflows, our investigative work, how are we feeling about it? Ndape Woshali, you say you're equally scared and excited. Who else feels that way? Tulani, you say you're excited. Fabulous. Anyone scared? Anyone more scared than excited? Simon, you're also excited. Fabulous. Hey, Nona Zulu, welcome. Anton, you're asking, can one feel both? And this is exactly the right question. Bernard is saying you're more scared than excited. Okay, so we've got a mix. Some people saying I'm more scared than excited, others saying more excited than scared, and some saying, well, can one be both? Can one be ambivalent about this? And the answer is that's exactly what we should be. We should be both excited and scared. I want you to be excited about AI. I promise you, I want you to be, because it holds enormous promise. But I actually need you to be scared as well, because it has enormous risks. And we're going to look at those risks and what they mean for our profession, as well as the rewards and the upsides and how they can help. So 3 things I want you to remember before we move on. The number one thing we need to remember is that AI isn't going to save you if you're lazy. AI asks us to work in new and different ways, potentially. Tabo, I see you think it makes people lazy. I think it does as well, or it can. But I will say that I don't think it's going to save you. You will be exposed for being lazy if you're using AI in ways that aren't smart. I'll put it like that. And we'll look at this as well. But remember that AI isn't going to save you if you're lazy. If you don't do the hard work, if you don't do the spade work, if you work in ways that are lazy, AI is not going to hide that, right? And the next thing we really, really have to remember is that AI gets it wrong all the time. And we'll talk a little bit later about hallucinations. I'm sure you've heard the term, but it's really important to remember that AI is not infallible. It's very good at sounding incredibly convincing, for instance, when we talk about generative AI, but it gets it wrong, and it gets it wrong a lot. And we've got to remember this as we work with these models. And the other thing to remember is that there are a host of ethical concerns that go along with using AI. We're going to unpack them today and look at them very clearly. Just for those of you who might be sitting there thinking like, what on earth is AI anyway, right? I want you to think about AI in the simplest terms as a giant prediction machine, whether we're talking about ChatGPT that gives you words, whether we're talking about a machine learning program that identifies clusters of information, similarities, differences, whatever it might be, whether we're talking even about an image generator like Midjourney. Essentially, what AI is doing is crunching data, crunching information, trying to recognize patterns, and then predict the next best word, pixel, answer that you are looking for, right? So think of it like a giant prediction machine. It's not aware, it's not self-aware, it's not sentient, it's not human, it's not even human-like. It is simply a giant prediction machine. Another very quick principle that I want us to hold in mind as we go through this is this principle of garbage in, garbage out. I'm sure you've heard it. Here's a cute little graphic to really drive it home. But if there's garbage in your data and you try to use machine learning with garbage data, you're going to end up with garbage. If you apply garbage data to artificial intelligence, you might end up with more sparkly looking garbage, but it's still going to be garbage, right? If you plug it through generative AI, well, it might look like a unicorn, but it's still garbage. And if you throw it into agentic AI, which is a whole bunch of different AIs talking to each other essentially and acting without oversight, you're still going to end up with a whole bunch of different types of garbage. Okay, so just remember, any AI is only as good as the information it's trained on. It's only as good as the data that underpins it. So ensuring that we are using clean and reliable data really is key when we talk about using AI, especially in journalism. So the way that we can think about AI right now as it currently stands is either as a robotic arm, so something that you can control to do something for you. Maybe you want to think of it like a junior intern and ask yourself, what would you trust a junior intern to do? Not a fully fledged reporter or assistant, but a junior intern. We can also think of it a bit like a personal assistant, perhaps, someone who does the things that we don't want to, right? But this is as far as AI goes at the moment. And in journalism, we really need to be clear about this, that we cannot let AI do the work of journalism for us because it's simply not reliable enough, okay? So think of it like a junior intern, someone in your newsroom who you might ask to make a few phone calls, check a few facts, but you're never, ever going to put anything generated by that intern out into the public space. You're never going to publish it, broadcast it, unless you've had oversight of it, right? Unless you've checked their work. So remember that AI is absolutely fallible. It gets things wrong. We need to treat it, if anything, like an intern, okay? So any questions before I move on, just about the real basics of journalism, because we've got a really mixed group here. I know some of you haven't used journalism ever, haven't used AI in journalism ever before. And then we've got some who are also exploring AI quite deeply in the profession. Any questions before we move on? Any comments? No? Everyone okay? Great. Okay. So I want us to look quickly at the risks and the rewards of AI in journalism. And uncharacteristically, I guess, for a journalist, I'm going to start with the good stuff. I'm going to start with the rewards, okay? And I want to start here. This is from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford. Every year, they release a fantastic document around journalism, media, and technology trends and predictions. These are for 2025, and they surveyed 326 media leaders in 51 countries and asked them, what AI initiatives are you planning that are going to be audience-facing? And these were the answers. So 75% of media leaders are looking at AI to turn text into audio, or the other round, audio into text, right? We've got 70% looking at AI-driven summarization, bullet points. Now, this is already happening across Africa. And in fact, one of the early adopters of AI-driven summarization was the Daily Maverick in South Africa. They have bullet points, headlines, tweets, that sort of thing, created by their own in-house AI for every article that's published on their website. AI translation into different languages is also of great interest. Of course, on our continent, this comes with risks just because, and we'll look at this a little later as well, but the underrepresentation of data from Africa means that things like translations of indigenous languages on our continent aren't as easily accessible and are error-riddled as a result. Some organizations are looking at chatbots or new search interfaces, text articles into video or video into text. All of these are becoming possible. What about adapting language and tone for different audiences? So it's really a quick snapshot of how newsrooms are planning to use AI this year, what their main focuses are in terms of things that are audience-facing. And AI offers us a host of options, right? It's all sorts of things, and there are three broad categories. You're going to get these presentations at the end of the session, so please feel free to go through these. I'm not going to be able to highlight all of them for you, but I wanted to talk about a few that are happening right now, right? So in terms of new delivery methods being used by AI, there are some fascinating case studies here in Africa. So AI presenters, for instance, in Zimbabwe, there's an organization called Sight that has its own AI presenter. Her name is Alice, and she is an avatar who presents news to consumers. And the beauty here is that Alice is able to present news without the threat of any comeback on a person, right? Because she's an AI avatar. And so news is anonymized where it needs to be, for instance. Personalized news, so news that is, think of a newsletter, for instance, that is delivered to your inbox, but it is personalized specifically for you. We can have conversations about news with AI chatbots. We can produce audio versions automatically from text articles. There are news websites across Africa that are already doing this. As I mentioned, the Daily Maverick summarizing articles into bullet points. We can adjust style. We can repurpose content. There's an enormous amount that we can do around delivery with AI. There's also an enormous amount that we can do around creating content. So get it to write your headlines. You can create illustrations. You can create entire news channels or radio bulletins, and we'll look at why you can, but you probably shouldn't a little bit later. We can interpret and interact with data in new ways. We can produce and augment videos. It's really endless what we can do. And then, of course, there's behind the scenes. And these are perhaps the ones that, that are interesting to us as journalists, because they make our our lives a little easier. Things like routine tasks can get easier. We'll look at how. Brainstorming, sub-editing, creating newsletters, summarizing transcripts, translating interviews, right? Helping us prepare for our interviews by doing research, better investigative journalism. We can do storyboarding, we can do fact-checking, verification. All of these things are more achievable with AI. There's an enormous range out there of how AI can help us. So let's just look at a few of them. One that I'm sure you've already started to experiment with and experience is this idea of routine tasks that are getting easier and less time consuming. Now, you've probably played with at least one or two of the programs or the models that I'm showing you here. Grammarly, for instance, helping you to correct your sentences, your spelling, your structure. Otter is a great transcription tool that many journalists use, although there are some concerns there that we'll look at as well. Google Pinpoint, Notebook LM, both of those allow you to explore data in new ways and explore documents in new ways. Flourish is great for visualizing data. ChatGPT, well, we'll look later at what you can do with ChatGPT, but by a country mile, it was the most used AI in this cohort. NewsWhip allows you to understand user behavior better, what is making headlines, why. And 11 Labs is great for audio, everything from audio cloning to toying with audio in fascinating new ways. So a lot of the things that we don't like doing as journalists get a lot easier when we can use AI. If you think of the years of your life you may have lost back in the day to transcriptions of interviews, AI can help with that. But again, there is a problem, right? And it's important to remember that, yeah, we'll look at the ethical concerns that go with this. Something that I wanted to mention, just because it's one of the best use case scenarios for investigative journalism, is the analysis of data. And this is a really excellent example all the way back from 2003, but I think it really still stands today. And this was ProPublica in the US, who spent months teaching a computer to analyze past Ebola outbreaks. And they linked these Ebola outbreaks to deforestation, and they pulled data from satellite imagery, online population databases. They asked the computer to examine these factors across the outbreaks. And this model was able to identify 51 locations with patterns of tree loss that were very similar to previous Ebola outbreaks and flag them as potential places where Ebola might break out in future, which, apart from being a service to humanity, is a fascinating investigative story. So analyzing data is a huge application of AI for us in investigative journalism. This is an example from VRT News in Belgium. This was a fascinating project that they did towards the end of last year. Basically, what they did was they took census data, voting patterns, demographic profiles, so voting data and demographic data, and overlaid them and tried to work out what this told them about voting trends and preferences. And you can see as we scroll through this article that suddenly they were able to say, aha, where unemployed people live, one party does better. But where there is a lot of unemployment, this happens as well, right? There are other parties that do better in municipalities. Oh, sorry, I've lost my screen for a second. With higher incomes, right? They were able to overlay data from voting with data from demographic surveys, and unbelievably quickly, they could give us really deep, rich reporting on how voting patterns are affected by various issues and facts, shall we say, right? So it was a really, really interesting project because We would never in a million years as journalists have been able to do this just with manpower. It would have taken us months. But by using AI, they were able within days to present reporting that was rich and nuanced and textured and allowed people to far better understand a story. Another example in terms of better investigative journalism is what the New York Times has been doing. It's been using AI to analyze large data sets and visual context. So it's taking satellite images, for instance, and it's counting bomb craters in conflict zones, most recently like Gaza, to really understand the extent of the conflicts that are unfolding. And this tells us that simply by getting AI to do this incredibly heavy lifting, we can improve our investigative journalism. We can automate this analysis that we could never do in a million years just as humans. It's impossible for us to analyze all of this manually, but we can automate it, get computers to do the heavy lifting, and then interpret those results for our audiences. So it really is a force multiplier. I want you to think of AI like a force multiplier. Another way that it helps us is in terms of interacting with data. So this is an example from the US as well. This is the San Francisco Chronicle. And just ahead of the US elections last year, they launched a chatbot trained on their decades of reporting on Kamala Harris, who could answer your questions about her. Now, of course, we know what happened in those US elections, and there is an explanation for why they couldn't do this with Donald Trump. They had covered Harris since her career began in the Bay Area, so San Francisco Chronicle, but they hadn't covered Trump as extensively, and so they didn't have the wherewithal. Well, they didn't have the data to be able to launch a Trump bot, but they could give you a Kamala Harris bot. Bernard, I'm seeing you say, as journalists, should we simply believe in the data analysis or should we do a cross-check on the facts? This is exactly the right question to ask. And the answer is we always need to check, right? There's an old saying, trust but verify. I would amend that for AI and say, don't trust, verify. We always have to verify. That's why I said AI isn't going to save you if you're lazy. We still have to do the journalistic work. We still have to get stuck in there and verify in the same way that we would with any information that we get. We need to interrogate what AI gives us and make sure that we are checking, double checking, triple checking, and checking again. And we'll look at why. Another thing that AI can sort of help us to do, and I do say sort of here, is fact checking and verification. Now, there are a host of different options in terms of fact checking and verification, but I would caution that I do not believe at the moment that AI is a credible solution for automated fact checking. There are many programs out there that claim to do this. There are many organizations trying to do it. And I've not yet found an automated fact-checking AI that I trust, quite frankly, because even if it only gets it wrong 2% of the time, to me, that's 2% too much. Where I think AI can help us fact-check and verify, it's in very specific use case scenarios. Something that it's incredibly helpful at doing is identifying claims that are fact-checkable. And if you've ever worked in the fact-checking space, you'll know that that takes up a great deal of time. We have to try and identify, well, what can we do with AI? What can we not? What can we check? What can we not? Because, of course, you can't check statements about the future. You can't check opinion. All you can check is claims. And AI is very good at identifying claims that can then be checked. It's just not very good at actually checking them. Where AI is also very useful is in terms of analyzing audio and visual artifacts, shall we call them, where you can actually try and work out whether this is real or not. And AI can help with that. But again, it's not infallible. So this is a border scenario for me, a border use case scenario. Another really interesting use of AI at the moment is around AI being able to help us rebuild trust. So BBC News in the UK, for instance, has launched a box on its site that gives readers content credentials. So it's using AI to show how BBC journalists have verified content's authenticity so people know that they can trust what they are seeing, right? So we've seen some really nice stuff, right? And what I want to look at next is where AI can actually feature in investigative journalism, because another really important principle I think we need to keep in mind, and it's a journalistic principle that you'll know, that really applies to AI as well, is this idea of just because we can doesn't necessarily mean we should, right? And we're going to look at why it can be very dangerous to use AI as part of the investigative journalism process. But we're still in the good news phase, so I want to look at where it actually can feature and where I think it can be very useful. And again, we're going to skip over things quite carefully, quite quickly, just because of time limitations, but you will have these presentations and you're so welcome to go back and maybe they'll spark some ideas for you. But I think there are 6 buckets in which we really can use AI effectively when we talk about investigative journalism. And number 1 is story scoping and planning. And we're going to look a little bit later at how ChatGPT, for instance, can help us really think through a story, plan a story, structure a story as a thinking companion, right? As that personal assistant we spoke of. Background research is a huge use case scenario for investigative journalism, and it's getting better all the time. Source handling with caution, that would be something, for instance, like transcription, something like using the content of an interview. We have to be very, very careful of how we do this, but it can be done ethically and responsibly, and I'll show you how. Document and data analysis, another enormous use case scenario. Verification and fact-checking, we've spoken about a little. We can use it to an extent, but again, there is huge caution there. And then story drafting. Now, not story writing. I do not encourage you to use a large language model to write your story for you for a host of reasons. And again, we'll look at those, but it can help you get closer to a first draft, okay? So when we're talking about story scoping and planning, everything from brainstorming leads to exploring trends and red flags, we can even get help sourcing preliminary data, for instance, that we can start using in our investigation. We can draft pitch outlines. We know how important it is to actually get our stories published, to have powerful pitches to editors or to commissioners. So story scoping and planning, there's a lot to do with AI here that is entirely responsible and ethical. The same with background research. We can use large language models like Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini to summarize long reports, to look into policies for us, to compare versions of legal and policy documents. Notebook LM, for assistance, is really, for example, is really effective at helping us comparing different documents. We can find prior reporting and fact bases. So we can use something like Deep Research or Perplexity or Cite to look at what information, what credible information is already out there. In terms of source handling, we start getting into murky territory, but I think it is still worth talking about. I would say if you are working on a sensitive story, it is very risky to feed transcripts, names, confidential information into an LLM like ChatGPT. It's really important not to break that confidentiality unwittingly, and we'll look at what that looks like. But after redacting, so after we clean up, let's say, an interview, we can use AI to help summarize or log conversations. We can use translation tools to prep multilingual interviews, for instance. We can use AI for transcription of non-sensitive interviews very happily. But the flag there is always to check for bias and errors, because even transcription tools hallucinate, right? They get it wrong. And we've got to be aware of this every step of the way as we use AI in order to do this responsibly. When it comes to documents and data analysis, we can use AI to clean up messy data. Even ChatGPT is great at doing this. It can look for patterns. It can look for regular expressions. This is regex, regular expressions, and it can suggest things that come up more often than not, right? We can use AI to find duplicates and shell company names. We can generate investigative leads from leaks. We can find entities, people, organizations, locations, just using, again, large language models like or language learning models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. They can help us with an enormous amount of document and data analysis. And then, of course, we can, to an extent, use it for fact-checking and verification as well. So we can cross-check claims across sources. Again, a program like Notebook LM or Google Pinpoint, very useful for this. We can ask AI to compare and summarize differences. But of course, we must verify that it's done this correctly. We can detect image and video tampering. We can check for AI-generated content through GPT-0, Hive, Sensity, these kinds of programs that are designed specifically for checking and detecting. We can also use AI to look for temporal and geographic inconsistencies, right? So it can help us spot context clues in images or video. So maybe the shadows aren't going the right way, maybe the wrong weather for the time of year. AI can help with spotting all of these things. And then when we talk about story drafting, well, there are a whole lot of things we can do, again, ethically and responsibly, without handing over the reins to AI. So it can help us outline story structure. It can help us get a first draft going, right? Again, with non-sensitive content, because every time you upload something to an AI, that information that you upload is ingested and it's used to train the model, and it stays there. And we've got to remember that we might unwittingly be breaking confidentiality or exposing sensitive information if we are riding roughshod and doing things without thinking. So we've got to think very, very carefully about what we feed AIs, because they store it and learn from it. And it's a huge ethical consideration in our use of it as journalists. So we can also use it to generate alternative headlines and leads. And it's great for this, what we call rapid iteration, right? So instead of spending 10 minutes thinking about the perfect headline, we can ask an AI to give us 10 headlines that we can choose between. And maybe we don't like any of them, but we're going to combine two and come up with something that we do like. It's a different way of working. Lucy, you're saying you're right, transcription tools can be prone to errors or hallucinations when dealing with poor audio quality, unclear speech, unfamiliar accents and dialects. Absolutely, you're spot on. We think that transcription tools, because they're sold to us as these automated geniuses, are able to simply spit out exactly the right information, but far from it. And Lucy, I must also say, even when the audio is perfect and the accent is one that is easily recognizable by the AI, it can still hallucinate. It can still get it wrong. So a host of ethical concerns, as I mentioned, and I want to jump into them now, because to me, we don't talk nearly enough about the risks of AI in journalism and what it really means to use AI responsibly, okay? Because the trade-offs are real. We might gain speed, but we lose accuracy. We're able to scale, we're able to do more for less, but can we really trust what's being created? We're able to save, cost cutting, right? We're able to edit our own video, let's say, or create a beautiful illustration without having to engage a graphic designer. But who's holding the AI to account? And who's checking that what is being created is ethical, responsible, accurate, and applicable, right? So we've got these huge trade-offs in this use of AI in our profession. And there are hidden risks, sometimes not so hidden, and we'll look at this, but the hidden risks of using AI irresponsibly are profound. Number one, this idea of hallucinations. And I know we all like the term hallucination. I've already used it several times myself. And for those of you who've maybe not heard the term, I think it's worth slowing down and just talking about hallucinations very quickly, because this is a term that has been used by big tech companies and by the creators of language learning models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, to explain away errors of programming, right? We hear the word hallucination, it sounds kind of cute. You know, the AI has taken some, I don't know, LSD, and it's hallucinating, it's making things up, right? It makes it sound cute, that it's having a trip, right? What's actually going on here is an error of programming, right? It's making stuff up. And I don't like the term hallucination because I think it turns a very serious issue into something that sounds a bit cutesy. It's not hallucinating, it's getting it dead wrong. And we need to be aware that AI models do this all the time, yeah? We've spoken a little bit about this already, but this idea of source exposure, unwitting source exposure, if we're using transcription tools, if we are uploading interviews to a large language learning model that we're going to use to work through the information those interviews contain, we are potentially unwittingly exposing our sources and breaking that confidentiality. There's also an enormous amount of hidden bias, and we're going to look deeply at bias because especially on our continent, it is unbelievably important to be aware of and to counteract where we can. And then the other really big risk, especially for us as investigative journalists, is this idea of there not being an audit trail. What do I mean by this? AI is often sold as a black box, right? We don't understand how it does what it does necessarily. We don't understand the algorithms that it uses to reach the answers that it gives us. We aren't aware of the data necessarily that it's been trained on. And so there's absolutely no way of auditing what it's giving us, right? We can't trace it back because it's this black box, it's locked to us, we cannot access it. And these are the really big risks that we face as journalists using artificial intelligence. So I want you, every time you consider using AI in any investigation, in any report, in anything, in fact, related to journalism, ask yourself, if I use AI to help with this story, can I still defend it in court? Can I defend it to my editor? Can I defend it to the public? And if the answer is no, then the answer is clear, right? Leave it out. Don't use AI unless you can defend it in court to your editor, to the public, because the stakes really are that high. The stakes for journalism are enormous. The credibility of our profession rests on us being able to justify our decisions and our reporting to our harshest critics. And if we can't justify our use of AI in the same way, we are going to run into enormous problems. And in fact, it's already happened around the world. So I talk about enormous problems. What are the big problems of using AI in journalism? Number one is bias. We're going to look at each of these individually, but bias in AI is incredibly real, whether it's gender bias, geographical bias, socio-political bias, racial bias, it's everywhere. We need to be aware of it and we need to counteract it where possible. Second problem, inaccuracy. We've started speaking about this. We're going to speak about it even more. Number 3 is a lack of accountability. And remember, I asked you in the beginning of this section of this training whether you were aware of any kind of AI policy in your organization, and there were no hands that went up. This speaks directly to an issue of a lack of accountability. Because if we're using AI, but we have no policies to govern the use of that AI, and we have no clear chain of accountability in terms of when things go wrong, we can get ourselves into trouble very, very quickly, and that trouble can be enormous. A lack of transparency is a huge problem as well. When do we use AI? When do we disclose to our users, our readers, our listeners, when we're using AI? How do we do this? No one's talking about this in the ways that we should be, because our audiences are already telling us that they don't trust us, right? We know there's a trust gap between journalists and their audiences around the world. And AI is only going to widen that gap unless we are transparent and responsible and ethical about our use of it. There's also this idea of violations of privacy. We've spoken a lot about breaking of confidentiality when it comes to sources, but we're also potentially violating the privacy of our users if we are using AI on our own platforms without telling them, AI to monitor them perhaps, AI to try to work out what people are consuming. We've got to be sure that we're not violating people's privacy through our use of AI. And then, of course, all of this leads to this decline in trust that I mentioned, that people already don't trust the news. And if we get it wrong on AI, they are going to trust us even less. So let's look at these problems quickly, because I think it's incredibly important to understand them so that we can gear ourselves to using AI in the correct way. And as I said, bias is, to me, the #1 concern, especially for our continent. And the thing that we've got to remember about bias in AI is that what we see is the tip of the iceberg, right? These are the statistical, the computational biases that we see AIs creating. But we've got to remember that bias in AI is underpinned by both human biases and systemic biases. Why? Because remember, we spoke about garbage in, garbage out, and the idea that an AI is only as good as the information, the data that it's trained on. The reality is that bias exists across our species in terms of human biases and in terms of systemic biases. We are all biased in our own ways, be it from our upbringing, be it from our understanding of the world, be it from how we were exposed to certain things. We are all biased. And the biases that are inherent in our communities, in ourselves, in our societies, are reflected in AI, in the data that AI are trained on, and thus in the AI themselves. So here is a collection of an enormous number of headlines that just start to spell out how bad the bias problem is, right? Racially biased algorithms, gender bias. We've got ideas of algorithmic bias. Artificial intelligence has a gender bias problem, just ask Siri, right? All of these, you can see, the best algorithms struggle to recognize Black faces equally, for instance. AI bias could put women's lives at risk, a challenge for regulators. All of these headlines point to a profound and widespread problem of bias. And we're going to look a bit at how this plays out, right? So when we talk about bias, I mentioned this a little earlier, but I just want to underline it again, that it's really important to remember that because less data is created on our continent and in general in the global south than in the global north, the lack of that data makes AI even more biased in the countries we live and work in. We have to be aware of this, and we need to actively control for it in our use of AI. So here's an example of what bias in AI might look like. And this is a multifaceted example, and I want to talk you through it. So you might remember a furor a little while back when Google Gemini first launched its image generation capabilities. If you asked Google Gemini to create an image of George Washington, the erstwhile long ago US president, this is what you got. George Washington as a black man, right? If you asked Google Gemini to create an image of a pope, it might give you an Indian woman pope. It might give you a black man pope. Neither of these, or in any of these examples, are historically accurate, right? And there was a huge furor around this. And Google eventually paused Gemini's ability to generate images as a result of this outroar, if I can put it like that. And what they had done was try to control for algorithmic bias, in this case, racial and gender bias, right? So they had tried to encourage their own image generation model not to only create images of white men, because that really is the problem that they were trying to control for. But what happened here is it swung the other way and started over-controlling, if I can put it like that. But to me, the real thing to talk about here is the reaction to this overcorrection being so loud and so prevalent around the world, whereas bias going the other way is quietly and simply accepted. And I'll give you an example. Here are 3 images that I've created over the years. This is between May last year and May this year, right? This is me using ChatGPT and a very simple prompt. I asked ChatGPT in each of these instances to create an image of a scientist experimenting with genetically modified mosquitoes in Kenya, right? Now you can see in May 2024, it gave me an incredibly odd and incredibly biased image, right? So number one, we've got a white male scientist working in the middle of the African savannah. What is a safari vehicle doing in this image? Right? What are the weird little bits and pieces? I just want to circle them. These strange little bits of pseudo-scientific equipment. I'm not even going to talk about the size of the mosquito in this image, right? But you can see there is enormous inherent bias in this image. It talks to a stereotyped and quite frankly offensive view of Kenya, and I would argue our continent as a whole. If you look at the image in the middle, this is 6 months or so later, or a couple of months later, you can see the image quality has improved a great deal. The mosquitoes are slightly smaller and maybe a little more plausible, but still very concerning. But we've still got a white male scientist sitting now at least in what looks to be a very rudimentary lab. But look outside the window of this image. It looks to me like he's in the middle of nowhere, right? He's in some strange rural area. It looks like there's almost like a rural school in the background with a school bus parked next to it. Is that really where a scientist would be exploring genetically modified organisms in Kenya? It doesn't make sense, right? Then if you look at the third image, that I generated just a few days ago, you can see there's been an enormous leap forward in the image generation capabilities of ChatGPT. And this now looks photorealistic. At least we now have a Black African scientist who is experimenting, as one would expect. He's got a badge, a Kenyan flag as a badge on his coat, which is a bit odd. The mosquitoes are generally the right size, but again, I want you to look at the background, and it seems to me like he's working under a zinc roof, right? A corrugated iron roof. Is that really an accurate reflection of how scientists work on our continent? Absolutely not. And so this is the inherent bias that I'm talking about. The previous images got lots of attention and were roundly derided, but I don't think there's nearly enough attention being paid to the kind of bias that is absolutely evident on a daily basis in the images that are being created by AI. This is a wonderful example from a publication called Rest of World. I don't know if you know them, but they do some really excellent work around bias. And what they did was that they analyzed 3,000 AI-created images to understand how these AI image generators see different countries and cultures. And I want to show you a couple. So a Mexican person, usually a man in a sombrero, right? An old elderly man, hardly any women feature in the set of images that were created just by the prompt, a Mexican person. You can see there's one woman, but the vast majority of these are old men in sombreros. And if you've been to Mexico, I think we can safely say that this is absolutely not representative in any way, shape, or form of the deeply rich and complex culture in Mexico. Here's another example for you. An Indian person is almost always a man with an old man with a beard, and very often wearing a turban as well, right? So you can see the absolute bias with which these images are being created. Every now and then you get an American Indian person, invariably a male as well, but for the most part, an old guru-style Indian man is what is created. And so here's another one for you. And I want to ask, can anyone guess where this person is supposed to be from? We've had a Mexican person, we've had an Indian person. Anyone want to take a guess as to where this person is supposed to be from? Can anyone spot a clue? Ndapo Oshali, yes, Nigeria. Well done. Well done for spotting this. A Nigerian person. Now, I've spent a lot of time in Nigeria, and while there are some cultural touch points here, I'm sure anyone from Nigeria and anyone who's been to Nigeria will agree with me 100% that this is a drop in the ocean of an incredibly multicultural and vibrant society, right? We are reduced, these large language learning models, these image generators reduce the world to stereotypes in really concerning ways. And we've got to be aware of this as we work with these programs. The images are the clearest and most easily seeable examples I can give you, but please know that this bias is inherent in every form of AI, and specifically generative AI is deeply problematic when it comes to bias. Another big problem, and absolutely one of the top problems that we need to worry about as journalists, is this idea of inaccuracy. We've spoken about hallucinations. Here is a concrete example of what this looks like. So a little earlier this year, BBC News sent out a breaking news alert on one subject, right? And the alert was CEO shooting suspect Luigi Mangione in angry outburst outside court as he fights extradition to New York. Follow live, right? Perfectly good breaking news alert. And this was the healthcare shooting suspect, right? The healthcare CEO shooting suspect in the US. And there was an angry outburst. What happened was that Apple Intelligence, right, the AI that lives on the iPhone, created an AI-generated summary of BBC News headlines and sent that out to its users. And this is what we ended up with. Luigi Mangione shoots himself. This is what hallucination looks like in action, right? And it happened repeatedly. It eventually paused this feature. Apple eventually paused this feature because its AI was just getting it wrong, and astoundingly wrong, embarrassingly wrong, but also dangerously wrong. So this is what hallucination looks like in the real world. And the problem here is that there's no human oversight. And we're going to talk about human oversight as something really key to remember. Even those news organizations that are partnering with LLMs like ChatGPT or Gemini, right? They're entering into agreements, into partnerships with them, are being hit by hallucinations. So here you can see ChatGPT hallucinating fake links to its partners' biggest investigations. I don't know if you would have heard of BNN late last year. This is a breaking news outlet that launched and crashed spectacularly within weeks. So BNN Breaking was AI-generated news. It had millions of readers. It had an international team of journalists. It had a publishing deal with Microsoft, but it got it so wrong that it was forced to close its doors within weeks because AI gets it wrong all the time, okay? Another thing that's really important when we talk about AI and the risks that it poses to journalism is around transparency. There's lack of transparency in terms of our use of it. So this was a really famous case almost 2 years ago now. Sports Illustrated decided to use AI to create articles, but didn't disclose that it was doing this, and in fact lied about it brazenly and openly, right? So see this guy here, Drew Ortiz. He even has Ortiz Drew's Reviews at gmail.com as an email address. He's got a little profile there. He's got a photograph. He was listed as one of the authors on Sports Illustrated Stories. Turns out Drew Ortiz doesn't exist. AI-generated image, person who doesn't exist, and a ridiculous little bio that was completely made up. So what Sports Illustrated was doing was generating artificial intelligence articles and then publishing them under fake author names. And people were incensed as a result of this. Another example from late last year, from Poland, Off Radio in Poland replaced all of its human journalists with AI-generated avatars. So these were voice avatars on this Polish radio station. There was an absolute public outcry because there was no human oversight. There was a total loss of authenticity, especially on the journalism side of things. And eventually, this radio station was forced to abandon its, what they later tried to call an experiment. But what they had done was they took off, they took all of their human staff off air, and they had the entire radio station populated, if you will, by AI avatars. And the response was immediate and extremely negative. People were furious. What they were most furious about, I have to tell you, is that there was absolutely no disclosure of this. There was no transparency around it. No one was told, none of the listeners, the users were told that this was happening. And people were incensed. Eventually, the radio station had to climb down spectacularly, reverse everything they had done, brought back human journalists. And so when we think about using AI in journalism, it's really worth remembering the outcomes of this research from Poynter and the University of Minnesota, that people are anxious and annoyed when they think about us using artificial intelligence, or they can be, right? So some people think it's okay. It's like a bit like a calculator. It helps them work. It helps us work faster and easier. Sometimes people see it as flat out cheating, right? How dare you use this? You are not doing your job as a journalist. And yet other people simply don't know what to think about it, and this makes them anxious. We need to be aware of how our users feel about us using AI. Another big problem is this lack of accountability that we've already started speaking about. The idea that because shadow AI use is so prevalent in newsrooms, it's being used behind the scenes on the down low, we're not telling anyone we're doing it, there's no clear line of accountability for it. And what that means is that bias can go unchecked, right? So if no one's actually aware that you're using AI, no one's looking for the bias that might be contained within the output of that AI. If it emerges that we've used AI and we haven't disclosed it, people lose trust in us. Our users start to lose trust in us. But also, as we saw, people can get anxious or annoyed. They can also get confused. So if we have AI processes that are opaque to our users, they can get really confused. And then they feel like we're not respecting them and we're not being honest with them. Violations of privacy is a huge issue as well. It's something we need to be very aware of as journalists. This is maybe not something that you've had to think very deeply about in your work until now, but I guarantee you this is becoming more and more of a problem in our newsrooms. Otter is a huge go-to transcription tool for journalists. We love using it. But this is a story from a little while back about a journalist who used Otter AI to transcribe a very sensitive call, right? With a source who the journalist had painstakingly tried to keep confidential and protected. They used Otter AI to transcribe the call, to record the call, and a day later, they got a very worrying email, a message from Otter inquiring about the purpose of the conversation with this source. And this led this journalist to go on a really deep dive into Otter and its privacy promises and the policies that it uses to govern it. And I think the takeout for me at the bottom of the page is really, really important. If you upload data to a service, you can't count on it staying private. Even if the privacy policies promise you it will, it's very, very risky to assume this. So just know if you are uploading data to any kind of AI service, you cannot count on it staying private. So if it needs to stay private, if it needs to stay confidential, we absolutely should not be uploading it to an AI model. This is an example in the law. So obviously the law is another sector in which there are huge issues around confidentiality. And this is a warning to lawyers that AI tools like ChatGPT and Otter are becoming common programs, but there is this risk of disclosure of confidential information that gives rise to, in this case, trade secret misappropriation claims, but in our case, can give rise to a whole lot more. And then the big one at the end, a decline in trust, the real risk that we run of using AI in journalism irresponsibly. Because we already know that the public don't trust us, and the scariest thing is the only people they trust less, you can see over here, to use AI responsibly is politicians and political parties. They really do not trust us to use AI. They trust scientists a reasonable amount, retailers perhaps, but they do not trust news media to use it responsibly. And the only people they don't trust more is politicians and political parties. So do the public trust us to use AI? The answer is, unfortunately, not really. And they don't like us using AI for very certain things, right? So most are comfortable with us using AI to resize images, for instance, or to do a bit of brainstorming, maybe to edit some video, image recognition, this kind of thing they're okay with, right? They start getting a bit worried when we're generating non-realistic, non-photorealistic images, or when we're visualizing public data using AI, when we're generating B-roll, for instance, so creating AI cutaways for our visual content. They don't like us visualizing the past or generating photorealistic images. They really don't like us doing this. Using best take features, removing watermarks, and something like generative expand, they really don't like. Generating a virtual presenter is the thing that they like least, for instance. So they really, our audiences are telling us very clearly that there are certain use cases for AI that they are comfortable with and certain ones that they really are not. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, right? All of these big problems make us feel a little hesitant perhaps to use AI. But there is still enormous promise in it. So what can we actually do? How do we mitigate these risks? Well, for every problem, there is a solution, right? And the big solutions to me around bias, inaccuracy, a lack of accountability, a lack of transparency, this risk to privacy, and this lack of trust. Very simple. We need to be aware of and mitigate bias at every step. We need human oversight to improve accuracy. We need to ensure accountability with clear frameworks, AI policies, guidelines, frameworks that we have to put in place in our work and in our newsrooms. We've got to double down on transparency. We've got to protect privacy with our ethical behavior. And we've got to use all of these things every step of the way to build trust. Now, I want to pause there for a little and ask if there's anything you want to chat about in terms of these risks and rewards before I move on to show you AI in action just a little bit. Anyone want to, anything you want to raise, any questions you have, anything you're not sure of? Everyone okay? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you like. Ndape Washoli, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, this is a very interesting topic. I'm not a journalist, but I find this particularly interesting because, especially when you're talking about, you know, the just double checking your work, double checking what AI gives you. I've realized recently I was having a conversation and I realized that they actually you can if you check your information, I mean if you request AI to produce some information for you and then it's incorrect, right? You can write back to especially like ChatGPT and say this is incorrect, and then it actually learns that and then says well, it responds to say, thank you, you're helping us build on our database, et cetera, et cetera. But I was wondering how maybe is that true? Or is it just like an automated response? Is that true that if I were to say, if I were to get some, if I were to prompt or to maybe just sit and give it information, would it really impact the next user and what it provides for the next user?
So these models, these models really are learning all the time. And while it might not be that your particular interaction with that model will feed directly into someone else's experience, these models are learning and adapting all of the time. One of the hallmarks of artificial intelligence is this idea of learning and adapting, right? And the models are evolving with every new bit of information that they are receiving. So we are helping to improve models as we work with them, and especially if we work with them in ways that are ethical and responsible. But I don't think that the pipeline is as clear as they would like you to believe. I do think it's worth working with and helping where we can to fix what's going wrong, to highlight issues, to report where AIs are incorrect, But I don't think that it's as clear-cut as they might want us to believe. Any other questions or comments, anyone, before we move on? No? Everyone okay? All right. So I want to look really quickly at these big solutions that we have been talking about in terms of mitigating bias, improving accuracy, ensuring accountability, transparency, protecting privacy, and building trust before we jump into a very quick demo of what we can do with AI, and the simplest and most accessible AI of them all. So in terms of mitigating bias, there are three things that I want us to remember in order to help prevent bias from creeping into our reporting, but also potentially to counteract the bias that already exists. And number one is, if we are using AI, and especially if we are using AI to create content, we've got to make sure there's a human in the loop at every stage. What do I mean here? AI generated content, whether it is an analysis of a data set or a visualization of information or generation of text images, it should never be allowed to reach an audience without human oversight, right? We've got to screen these tools regularly for bias. It's called adversarial testing. See how much of a mistake you can get it to make, right? We've got to be aware of the bias that is baked into these programs that we use, these models that we play with. We've got to critically evaluate sources. We've got to use our human judgment, our editorial judgment, right? Another thing to mention is that we need to use diverse data sources, and this is particularly important in South Africa and in Africa in general. We need to find new and credible data sources that challenge global narratives. There are enormous amounts of data being created on our continent, and they're just not being utilized. We need to ensure that we are using diverse data sources, that we are identifying them and then using them in our reporting, in our work, in order to counteract the bias that is so prevalent. Next thing we need to do in terms of improving accuracy, well, here's a cute little chat GPT prompt that I gave it. Create an infographic on how journalists can improve accuracy in their use of AI. And it's amusing only because look at all of the inaccuracies included in this, right? Words that we can't even make out. Human oversight is key. I think that probably meant key, but this is just a cute little example of how wrong AI can get it, even when you ask it to try to help you to improve accuracy. But I think the real key here is to remember this little bit of this gem from the Associated Press's guidelines around AI, and that is that any output from a generative AI tool should be treated as unvetted source material. So in the same way that we wouldn't believe something that an unvetted source told us on the street, we would go and check it out, we would double check, we would triple check, we would do the 3-source rule. We've got to treat what we're getting from AI in the same way, right? Unvetted source material. AP staff must apply their editorial judgment and AP's sourcing standards when considering any information for publication. That to me is really, really key. Treat everything you get from AI as unvetted source material. Again, make sure there's a human in the loop that is vetting that information before it goes anywhere near your audiences. Check, double check, triple check information. Create clear roles for monitoring and correcting AI output. Make sure you're using high quality data and that you understand where that data comes from. That's really key. And in terms of ensuring accountability, well, number one, we have to understand in our organizations, in our newsrooms, in our own use of AI, who is responsible for AI errors and issues. Do you have guidelines and policies in place that allow you to do this, to ensure that AI is being used in the way that you want it to be used, your organization wants it to be used. I think it's also incumbent on us to report on any AI use clearly, responsibly, and in an accessible way, to invite our audiences in so that they understand how and why we're using AI, and then help them improve their own AI media literacy, right? Internal accountability, you've got to be able to answer these questions before you use AI. Who's responsible if it makes a mistake? Is there any invasion of privacy? Are we appropriating other people's content, including other publishers' content, by doing this? Is it potentially an unfair competitor within our newsroom? Could it supercharge the spread of misinformation and propaganda? And if we can't answer those questions to our own satisfaction, we should not be considering use. The Guardian has an incredible approach to generative AI, The Guardian based out of the UK. I love what they say around Gen AI tools being exciting, but currently unreliable. They say there's no room for unreliability in our journalism or our marketing, creative, and engineering work. At a simple level, this means the use of Gen AI requires human oversight. We will seek to use Gen AI tools editorially only when it contributes to the creation and distribution of original journalism. We will guard against the dangers of bias embedded within generative tools and their underlying training sets. If we wish to include significant elements generated by AI in a piece of work, we will do so only with clear evidence of a specific benefit, human oversight, and the explicit permission of a senior editor. And we will be open with our readers when we do this. Bavarian Broadcasting in Germany on this side also has a lovely approach. And it's this one sentence that I think we really, really need to absorb. Technology is never an end in itself at Bavarian Broadcasting. Instead, it must help us deliver on a higher purpose to make good journalism. Okay. Transparency and accountability go hand in hand. We've spoken a bit about being transparent with our audiences. This is advice from Trusting News to journalists on how to be transparent, right? Readers say they want us to disclose, but we'll look at why it's not always the best idea, but nevertheless, I think it is right at this point in time to be transparent about our AI usage. So we can and should explain our reasons for using AI. We should explain where human oversight is. We should engage with our audiences on topics related to AI so that they start to understand AI better. We should educate our communities about AI, and we should showcase responsible AI practices in our news products to build trust so that people understand how we're using AI, why we're using it, what the benefit is of us doing this. Another beautiful piece of research coming out of Pointer. The baseline here is to put audience and ethics first, right? When it comes to using AI in journalism, put audience and ethics first. They largely want to be told when AI is used in news production. There is a need for clear, specific disclosures around how we're using it. But we've got to avoid what's called label fatigue, right? We've got to consider data privacy. We've got to experiment to discover what we can do, but we've got to do this thoughtfully, responsibly, ethically, right? The New York Times, I think, does a really good job of this. They have an entire article that was published just over 2 months ago now around how they use editorial judgment in algorithms to curate home screen content. And they explain things like hybrid curation, customization, override capabilities. They have transparent features on their site so that the New York Times, by the way, has gone all in on using AI in the news, but they are very transparent about what they do, what they don't do, how they do it, and why they do it. And I think it's a really excellent example of how we can actually use AI use in a strange way to build trust. But I would say that it's also worth being aware of this little bit of research that came out late last year. The idea that journalists might actually prefer us just to not use AI, right? And the little bit that I've highlighted is from the abstract of this research paper out of Minnesota in the United States. We find on average that audiences perceive news labeled as AI generated as less trustworthy, not more, even when articles themselves are not evaluated as any less accurate or unfair. And so the way that I would encourage you to approach this, everyone, in terms of when do we disclose, when do we not disclose? For me, the rule of thumb is simple. If AI has had a material effect on the way that your story is being reported or on your story in any way, shape, or form, then it is worth disclosing. At this point in time, I think it's important that we bring our audiences into the loop, right? Now, it's also important to remember that spell checkers are a form of AI, right? If we use Grammarly to correct the grammar of our reports, do we need to disclose that? I don't think so, because it doesn't have a material effect on the reporting itself, on the news itself, on the journalism itself. In the same way that we wouldn't disclose that we use the internet to do something, right? Because it's assumed. More and more, it is going to be assumed as AI becomes a part of our daily lives that we are using it. But for now, I think where it has a material effect on the journalism of what we do, it is still important to disclose. But we have to be aware that over-disclosure can actually make it feel less trustworthy to our audiences. In terms of protecting privacy, well, the first thing that I really want to caution you is to be aware that if you're not paying for the product, it means you are the product. What do I mean by this? There are a lot of free AI tools out there. And you've got to ask yourself, what are they getting for the price of free 99, right? If you're not paying for something, it means they want what you've got. And it means the information that you are giving to that service is actually the product, not the service that you are using, okay? So if you're not paying for the product, remember you are the product. And then ask yourself, is it ethical for you to productize your work in this way? So we've got to always be aware of how the data that we're feeding into AI is stored, is processed, and eventually, one hopes, deleted, especially when it comes to personal data. So if on your news website, for instance, you are asking people to give you their personal information in order to create an account, are you sure that it's being stored, processed properly, deleted where appropriate? And also, again, I have to flag, I've said it before, I want to say it again, when anything that you put into LLMs like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, they store and learn from. So be sure that you have permission to essentially share that information and that it is ethical for you to do so. Otherwise, it has no place being uploaded into any of these programs, services, models. So the big question, how do we build trust? Well, to me, the big solutions are exactly how we do this. To build trust, we have to mitigate bias. We have to improve our accuracy. We have to ensure accountability. We have to double down on transparency, at least for now. We have to protect privacy with ethical behavior. And through doing all of this, we can hopefully build some trust. So a checklist, everyone. How do we make sure that we are using AI responsibly and ethically in our work? First and foremost, can you verify this output independently, right? So if AI gives you something, remember it's unvetted source material. Ask yourself, am I able to verify it? Have I documented how I have used the AI tool in my reporting? Did I avoid entering any sensitive or private information as part of this process? Would I be comfortable disclosing this to an editor or an audience? And have I double-checked and triple-checked everything for bias and errors? This, to me, is a super useful checklist to any journalist considering using AI in their reporting, because if you cannot answer yes to every single one of these, that reporting has no business reaching an audience. Okay. Right, I wanted to spend just a few more minutes showing you what we can do with something as simple as ChatGPT, because that's the one everyone's using, right? I think all but 3 of the people who signed up for this course said that they are using ChatGPT actively. I want to show you what ChatGPT can actually do for journalism, and then encourage you to take the learnings from this and experiment with all the other programs that are out there. There are a host of beautiful tools, models, programs, services that are useful for journalism, that can be used in very ethical and responsible ways. The only way to do it is to get stuck in there and experiment. So I want to show you what experimenting looks like before we wrap up and have a few minutes for questions. I'm going to take you through this very quickly. But the first thing I want to encourage you as a ChatGPT user to do is to set your custom instructions. Has anyone got custom instructions? Quick show of hands. Anyone using custom instructions in ChatGPT? No, it's one of ChatGPT's hidden superpowers, everyone. So if you just click on your account name, you'll see a section called Customize ChatGPT. You can tailor the way that ChatGPT works for you. Here is an example of my own custom instructions, right? This is what I've told ChatGPT I want. First, when I want it to sound like me, it's got instructions. Be sharp, be direct, no fluff. Engage critically, not passively. Stay human, stay alive, adapt to the stakes. Always put journalism as the foundation. Think globally, act practically, call out blind spots, right? So ChatGPT now knows that this is how I want it to engage with me and how I want its outputs to sound. And then the other thing that you can give ChatGPT is more information about you. And my instructions to it, you can see in terms of what it needs to know about me, is that I like strategy and execution. I'm not just a big ideas person. I actually want real world implementation as well. My ideal response structure is dynamic, so it adapts to the stakes. I appreciate critical thinking and diverse perspectives. My relationship with AI is balanced. My interests go beyond journalism. Now, these are custom instructions that I have worked on deeply for years now. But in terms of how to sound like you, you're all journalists. You've all written enormous amounts, or you've created beautiful videos, audio scripts, that sort of thing, right? I encourage you to upload those to ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT to analyze them, and then come up with its own set of custom instructions for how to sound like you. That's what I did. I uploaded a vast sample of my writing over the years. I got it to analyze it, and that's how I got to this section on the left. And I update it regularly, by the way. But it really is a superpower. If you want to stop getting generic, boring, beige responses from ChatGPT, custom instructions are a huge thing. And I want to use a very quick case study today to talk about how we can use ChatGPT. This is a report that came out this week around the BBC and covering child sex abuse in South Africa's illegal mines, right? I don't want to go too deeply into the facts of it, but this is essentially, this and this are what the story looks like, right? It's a pretty, comprehensive story. And it's all about the exploitation of child labor underground in illegal mines. And I want to show you how we can play with this content using ChatGPT to get us even richer reporting, to help brainstorm, research, do all sorts of exciting things, right? So let's look first at brainstorming and research. And before we do, I'm sure you've all played around with prompting, but I find that we really need to make sure every time we ask ChatGPT to do anything for us, to give it these 4 things. Number 1, we give it a persona. Tell it who it is. So an easy way to do this is say, act as a credible investigative journalist, right? You've told it that it's a journalist. Now it's going to assume the characteristics of a journalist in what it does. If you tell it to act as a blogger, it's going to give you a very, very different outcome, right? So always tell it what you want it to act as. Tell it what it knows. You are an expert in illegal mining in South Africa and have reported deeply on it. Give it a specific task. Tell it what you want it to do and give it a clear goal. Tell it why it's doing it. Okay, so here's an example. Act as a credible, trustworthy journalist in South Africa with a deep knowledge of illegal mining in the country. Analyze the below story. And I just copied and pasted the BBC story below. Give me 4 potential investigative angles related to the BBC investigation and illegal gold mining in South Africa. And this is what ChatGPT gives us. Within a few seconds, the idea of cross-border trafficking, who enables the supply chain of child labor, right? It gives us state failure and legal impunity, why no prosecutions for child rape underground? Who profits? Follow the money from shaft to market, and corporate and government negligence. Who owns these abandoned mines and why are they open, right? 4 very quick ideas of how we might take the story forward, if you will, right? How we might come up with a fresh angle on the work that the BBC has already done, for instance. We can give it a different persona now and say, act as a human rights expert with a deep knowledge of this issue. Tell me about the common human rights or labor abuses associated with illegal mining operations globally. And ChatGPT spits out a whole new type of information: forced labor and human trafficking, gender-based and sexual violence, dangerous, degrading working conditions. All of these extra bits of information with a very strong human rights lens. Okay, so now we're building up our understanding of the story. We're using it to do brainstorming and research. Now you can play with something called deep research, if you like. I don't know if you've explored deep research on ChatGPT, but it is devastatingly effective at pulling together information. Obviously, you need to check the sources, and those sources are constantly made clear during the deep research process. I'll show you that. But before we even get to deep research, you can use ChatGPT to help you write an effective prompt for that deep research, right? So help me write an effective deep research prompt for summarizing recent reports or publicly available data about illegal mining in South Africa. And ChatGPT plots out this beautiful research prompt with an objective, key areas of focus, sources that we wanted to consult, and deliverables. Now, you would obviously go through this research prompt and see if you agree with everything that it's given you before you implement it. But it's a pretty good prompt. I went through it. I was actually pretty happy with it. So I copied and pasted this prompt that it gave me and asked it to do deep research. And this is a little video of the research that took 12 minutes to come out, right? Government responses, law enforcement actions, enormous amounts of data. And you can see there are little gray, if I just pause for a second, these little gray blocks that you can see after each sentence link directly to the source of that information. So you can go and verify every single bit of information that it gives you. And of course you have to, because as we know, AI gets it wrong. And we go on. Enormous amounts of data that would have taken you days to, I think we were, no, sorry, everyone. Where were we? I'm so sorry. We've now gone, no. Everyone, I'm going to pause for just a second. I'm going to jump out and get us back to where we should be. I'm so sorry about that. There we go. Present full screen. Sorry about that. So here we are back. But you can see how absolutely intricate this research is. And it took ChatGPT 12 minutes to do what would have taken me probably 3 days. All of the sources are listed. You click on those little gray boxes and they go straight to the section of the source from which the information is drawn. So it's reasonably easy to check and double check information. It gives you conclusions. It gives you recommendations at the end. It is unbelievably powerful in terms of helping you with research. Okay, so I encourage you to play around with deep research, but do check your sources. You see it lists all the sources at the end as well, and you can go even deeper into how it came up with what it did through these sources. So I really encourage you to explore deep research. I think it's a fabulous tool for journalists, but used with care. Something else we can do is called sandboxing. So you can actually use AI to debate itself. You can tell it it's a duo of a crack investigative reporter and a deeply experienced news editor. The two of you need to figure out the best way to take this story forward and make it deeply relevant to a young urban audience in Johannesburg. Use a scratch pad for the debate. I've said roughly 500 words, and then give me the refined work. So here you can see the scratch pad. We've got the investigative reporter and the news editor debating how are we going to do this story, right? And this comes out in front of you. It's a great way of getting AI to consider the tension between reporters and editors, right? So we can see these two characters that ChatGPT has assumed having a debate on how we would take the story forward and make it relevant to a youthful audience. And then at the end, it spits out a refined editorial plan, right? And this is its pitch. It says, the city beneath us is the title, how illegal mines are feeding violence, trauma, and dirty gold in Joburg. It's saying we should anchor the story in Johannesburg, where abandoned mine shafts are not relics of the past, but active front lines of human rights abuses and organized crime. We can connect the dots between international headlines and local realities. We show how this underground economy sustains violence, fuels trafficking, threatens the lives of Joburg residents. It gives us suggestions for multimedia components. It gives us investigative focuses. It gives us tone and goal even, right? A really clear idea of what a story might look like. And again, this is not getting AI to do your work for you. Remember that all of this is underpinned by the BBC source article. There is no way that AI would be able to do this if it weren't for that original article. And obviously, we would not be using the BBC's article without permission or without credit, right? And the really beautiful use case scenario of this is if we were able to use this as the BBC, right? So you can repurpose your own work by feeding it to AI and having a brainstorming session in terms of where to take it, yeah? You can ask ChatGPT for a prototype on how this may roll out, and it'll tell you, well, we can drop the flagship story on the launch. There would be a long-form investigative feature and then a sidecar video. Day 2 would be around social amplification, so we'd have Instagram and TikTok reels, maybe an interactive Instagram story. Day 3, we can drop a podcast, 15 to 20 minutes around the topic. Day 4, maybe a call to action and accountability push. And then optional add-on for the rest of the month. So it gives you a prototype on how you might want to roll out your story. And then you can say, okay, I like this. Now I want to try and pitch this to someone. Draft a one-pitch paragraph or one paragraph pitch for this article for me. And ChatGPT can help with this. And it says, the city beneath us is a hard-hitting, locally grounded investigation into how Johannesburg's abandoned mine shafts have become epicenters of human trafficking, child abuse, and organized crime, hidden in plain sight beneath the city. As police wage high-profile crackdowns and syndicates burrow deeper underground, we follow the money, the trauma, the silence that allows it all to continue. This story exposes how illegal mining is no longer a rural crisis. It's reshaping Joburg's safety, economy, and moral fabric one shaft at a time. You can also use ChatGPT to summarize long reports and policies, compare versions of legal and policy documents, finding prior reporting and fact bases, extracting timelines, events. It can do all of these things and more for you. I see we're out of time, everyone. I had wanted to show you a few more use case scenarios, but I also want to be very respectful of your time and give you some chance for questions. There are several more use cases that will be included in the presentation. You are welcome to go through them at your own pace, and you're welcome to contact me, email me with any questions that you might have around how we can use ChatGPT specifically. But I wanted to give you just a small insight into the enormous ways in which we can do this. I'm sorry that we've run out of time, but I'm happy to share those with you and talk you through them at a later stage if you'd like. Ndape, Shali, I think for now, maybe we should open it up to questions, comments, anything else that we'd like to talk about before we have to wrap up?
Yes, thank you so much, Camilla. That was a lot, but I think it was easy to understand. But we do have a few minutes left. I'm gonna open the floor. I think we could either you could either raise your hand or you could unmute yourself if you have any questions. In the meantime, you can also type something in the chat, so I'll be checking the chat. I see Ray has left something in the chat for us. He says, thank you, Camilla. This was extremely useful. I agree. And I'm not biased at all. And so I see.
I see HP has actually posted a question in the comments. Shall I deal with that quickly?
Yes, please go ahead. I hadn't seen it.
So you're asking, is it safe to transcribe sensitive audio or video messages to print using AI or any application? The answer, quite frankly, is no. I would not input like truly sensitive information into an AI unless I understood very, very deeply what that AI's policies were, and unless I was very sure that I was comfortable with those policies. Non-sensitive information, I think, is ethically sound to use with these applications, but anything sensitive, I would be so careful, because as much as it's unlikely that the interview in its entirety would ever be republished, repurposed in its entirety by one of these models, the risk is that you just don't know where that content goes. And as we saw with the example around Otter, there are strong opportunities for that information to go places it shouldn't. I would heartily encourage you to keep sensitive information air-gapped. If you want to use AI to process this kind of thing, what you can do is download a local model. So something like DeepSeek, the Chinese version, if you will, of ChatGPT, can be useful in this regard, because what you could do is download a local model, right? So you can basically pull a very light model of DeepSeek onto your computer, take your computer off the internet, and then run your sensitive information through that model, not connected to the internet, knowing that it's not going to go anywhere. But if you're using something that is connected to the internet, I really would caution you to be incredibly cautious when it comes to any kind of sensitive audio, video, text, doesn't matter what it is, any kind of sensitive information, keep it away unless you really know what's going to be done with it.
Okay, that's I think that's also in line with the training we received from Des on security and safety online. Just to be very cognizant, and I'm just going to plug that again. It's on our website and our YouTube channel. I think if you take the combination of these two training sessions, it'll create a lot of you'll have a lot of useful information and guidance. So I don't know if you'd seen it, Camilla. There was a question about the policy and rules that you would discussed.
Yes, happily so, happily so. In fact, I've authored several policies and rules for newsrooms, and I'm happy to share some of those. No problem at all.
Okay. I'm also just, for anybody watching this afterwards, there will be a tip sheet and the presentation. So all of the slides that Camilla shared will be available on the HNF website as well.
Yeah, and I'm happy to add an example policy into that as well. You know, there are some excellent ones available out there for free for newsrooms that you can customize. I think it's really important to explore those. But I'm very happy to share some of my own as well, because I feel deeply passionate about the need for proper accountability, proper policies, proper frameworks in place to bring AI usage out of the shadows and into the light, if you will.
I think we would all appreciate that. Thank you. And we'll all try and add it to our own policy documents. So Billy says a very interesting presentation and much appreciated. So thank you very, very much, Camilla, once again. And we'll share the link once everything is up.
Wonderful. Good luck, everyone. I hope that you are able to think about the use of AI in journalism in a slightly different way after this session. I encourage you to experiment. I encourage you to get stuck in, but I do also encourage you to keep your wits about you and remember your journalism ethics, those core values and principles that are more important than ever now.